Most textbooks have a sentence somewhere that reads exactly like this. In 1498, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama discovered India. It's taught as a grand triumph of maritime exploration, but you cannot discover a place where millions of people already live. Long before European ships ever crossed the Atlantic, India was a deeply established civilization, ruled by wealthy, complex kingdoms. Its coastal cities traded in silk, rare, precious gems, and massive quantities of spices. Black pepper was so valuable it was treated like currency, earning the name black gold. Indian merchants were the center of a massive web of global commerce, connecting directly to the Chinese, Persians, and Romans. India was the undisputed economic engine of the world, while European nations sat at the farthest, isolated edges of this supply chain. That massive supply chain relied entirely on a stable land bridge between East and West. But in 1453, the Ottoman Empire successfully captured the city of Constantinople. This victory completely blocked the traditional overland routes that carried Eastern goods into Europe. Because they controlled this choke point, Ottoman merchants held a strict monopoly. Europeans could still get pepper and cinnamon, but only by paying an astronomical markup. European monarchs realized their treasuries would drain entirely if they kept paying these exorbitant fees. They faced total economic isolation from the most lucrative markets on Earth. They needed a way around the blockade. Since the land was sealed off, their remaining option was to try something completely untested, sailing down into the vast unknown ocean to find a direct path themselves. This era of maritime exploration began as a desperate attempt to salvage a broken economy. Portugal and its neighbors were gambling on the ocean because their primary land connections had effectively ceased to exist. The nation that took the biggest initial risk on this bypass was Portugal, driven heavily by the royal funding of Prince Henry the Navigator. The Portuguese spent decades treating oceanic exploration like a massive state-sponsored research project, testing advanced ship designs and highly precise navigational instruments. The human cost of this testing phase was staggering. Fleet after fleet sailed south into unmapped Atlantic waters. Entire crews deteriorated from disease and exhaustion, and dozens of their ships were crushed by violent oceanic storms. The gamble finally paid off in 1488. Explorer Bartholomew Diaz managed to survive a voyage all the way around the southern tip of Africa, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans actually connected. Diaz didn't make it the rest of the way to India, but his survival provided the physical proof the Portuguese crown needed. The route was dangerous, but it was possible. 10 years later, an explorer named Vasco da Gama accepted the assignment to finish what Diaz started. He left Lisbon in 1497 with 4 ships and roughly 170 sailors. The physical reality of the voyage was horrific. Without reliable access to fresh fruits or vegetables for months on end, food supplies rotted, and sailors slowly died of scurvy. When the surviving, battered fleet reached the East African coast, they didn't know how to navigate the final stretch. They only made it across the open Indian Ocean by hiring experienced local navigators who thoroughly understood the regional currents. Those guides led da Gama's ships directly to the coastal city of Calicut on May 20th, 1498. This is the exact moment textbooks describe as a grand discovery. Da Gama merely found the back door to a reigning superpower. He had finally secured the maritime bypass Europe needed to break the Ottoman trade monopoly. Once the route was mapped, Portugal's exclusive access didn't last. The Dutch, the French, and eventually the British all rushed to sail their own fleets down the African coast. Initially, they arrived strictly as foreign merchants, setting up coastal trading posts for spices and silk. But slowly, immense corporate wealth allowed these groups to buy political leverage among competing local rulers. The most aggressive of these organizations was the British East India Company, established in 1600. What started out as a private business venture expanded by deploying its own military force to conquer vast stretches of the subcontinent. This corporate control tightened until the massive Indian Revolt of 1857, at which point the British Crown stepped in to dissolve the company and assume direct, formal authority over the territory. That single path through the ocean had provided the physical infrastructure for European nations to slowly convert a simple commercial exchange into total colonial subjugation. It took nearly 5 centuries for the cycle to conclude. In 1947, after a long, bitter freedom movement led by figures like Jawaharlal Nehru, India reclaimed its sovereignty. Looking at the millions of people celebrating their independence, the contrast is sharp against the few desperate sailors who stumbled onto their shores in the 15th century. Because the colonizing powers wrote the history, they framed a hostile corporate takeover as a heroic act of discovery. The reality is driven strictly by economics. A blocked trade route threatened to bankrupt Europe, and their desperate scramble for a detour shifted the center of global wealth from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. The truth is, India never needed to be found, but the maritime link established in 1498 created the physical logistics for 5 centuries of European expansion across the continent.